Yeah, it covers a massive amount of ground right out of the gate.
It really does, and the author clearly demonstrates this deep, factual command of current events, bringing incredible passion to the piece.
Oh, absolutely. The raw informational density is super impressive.
Right, but to elevate this from, a resonant piece for the already convinced into a robust, ironclad argument that can actually persuade skeptics, the structural organization and tonal calibration really need some strategic refinement. I completely agree. When an author gathers this much distinct political data, the reader needs a reliable engine to process it all, or the sheer volume of facts can actually work against the persuasive goal.
Exactly. So a key theme running through this material seems to be how political figures across the entire ideological spectrum are turning against Israel.
Yeah, it's a rapid journey.
It's almost breathless, really. I mean, it jumps from J.D. Vance on the U.S. right, clashing over those Time magazine influence campaign reports, straight over to Rahm Emanuel on the U.S. left.
Right, with Emanuel blaming the Israeli prime minister for the country's pariah status.
And then, it leaps right across the ocean to the U.K. left, bringing in Andy Burnham and Gary Lineker. It's just a vast amount of territory to cover in a short span.
It is. The draft presents a fascinating cross-partisan phenomenon, but the underlying connective tissue linking these disparate political figures needs stronger articulation to maximize its impact.
How so?
Well, the current structure lumps together J.D. Vance, Rahm Emanuel, Ro Khanna, and Andy Burnham under this really broad general umbrella of scapegoat.
Right, just putting them all in one big bucket.
Exactly, and because these figures operate with vastly different political motivations and ideology, jumping sequentially from one to the next without a bridging framework just makes the narrative feel disjointed.
It risks overwhelming the reader with disconnected grievances, right?
It does. It feels like a list. The suggestion here is to categorize and introduce the critiques by political ideology or methodology.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if you demonstrate exactly how this scapegoating manifests differently across the political spectrum, you prove the core thesis, that this is a universal structural issue, rather than just isolated incidents.
Yeah, I love that. It's a bit like reviewing 3 entirely different types of restaurants: a diner, a vegan cafe, and a steakhouse, and just saying they all serve bad food without explaining why the respective chefs are failing based on their distinct menus.
That is the perfect analogy. Yes.
You have to evaluate them on their specific menus, but I do want to push back on that slightly.
Okay, sure.
If we group them this way, by ideology instead of timeline, do we risk losing the chronological urgency of these recent events? I mean, does the thematic grouping actually heighten the urgency or kill it?
That's a fair question, but I'd argue it heightens it. In a deep dive analytical piece, the urgency doesn't come from the fact that these comments happen in the same month.
Right.
The true urgency comes from the terrifying realization that entirely opposed political factions are converging on the exact same scapegoating tactic, using totally different logic.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a much scarier realization for the reader.
So, for example, before introducing J.D. Vance, explicitly frame a section around the populist right's isolation. Explore how Vance's claims of foreign influence campaigns via Brad Pascal and his push to negotiate with Iran serve a very specific domestic agenda.
And then you contrast that with the left.
Yes. Use a clear transition to the establishment left's diplomatic appeasement. You frame Rahm Emanuel's insistence on a two-state solution and his equation of Greater Israel to the river to the sea chant as a distinct, contrasting methodology.
But they arrive at the same scapegoating endpoint.
Precisely. And that proves the overarching point so much more robustly.
That makes total sense. Now let's pivot to the actual prose. Let's look closely at the section discussing Rahm Emanuel's speech at Tel Aviv University, where he accused of monstrous distortions regarding food aid, Palestinian farmland, and international pariah status.
Yeah, the emotional resonance of the piece here is palpable, yet calibrating the highly charged vocabulary would significantly enhance its persuasive power for a broader, potentially skeptical audience.
It's very intense.
It is. The text heavily relies on subjective, emotionally loaded descriptor. Things like agenda of malice and mendacity, disgusting tactic, fanatical hatred.
Utterly deluded, stupid, yeah.
Right. And while that's reflective of the author's passion, these adjectives can trigger defensive reading in audiences who aren't already aligned with the author's viewpoint.
It ironically undermines the very strong objective facts presented right next to them.
Exactly. The author has great data like specific October 7th casualty number or the historical rights to Judea and Samaria, but the adjectives distract from them. The suggestion is to let the evidence do the heavy lifting by replacing subjective adjectives with objective framing and juxtaposed facts.
Forcing the reader to basically independently arrive at the conclusion of malice or delusion on their own.
Yes, exactly. So, for a concrete example, when dissecting Emmanuel's speech, instead of calling his comparison of Jewish residency to the river to the sea chant obscene, just lay out the facts side by side.
I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this in practice. What would that actually sound like?
You might write something like, Emmanuel equated Jewish residency in the disputed territories, a presence backed by historical and legal frameworks, with a chant widely recognized as a call for the geographic erasure of Israel.
Wow, yeah, that's powerful.
Right? And then you just say, the disparity between a residential presence and a call for elimination is stark. By removing the word obscene, the reader is trusted to see the obscenity of the comparison themselves.
Is the connection between the raw emotional reaction and the political reality fully established in the material, though? Or is that an area to potentially bolster?
It's definitely there in the research. It just needs to be foregrounded over the adjectives.
But if we strip away the passionate adjectives, how do we ensure the author's unique voice doesn't become too clinical or dry? We don't want it to sound like a textbook.
Voice isn't just about using strong adjectives. Voice is about pacing, the sharpness of the juxtaposition, and the exact facts you choose to highlight. Pointing out the hypocrisy with cold, hard facts often sounds much punchier and more authoritative than just calling something disgusting.
That's a great point. Okay, so moving to the final piece of the puzzle, the material makes a strong case for exposing these lies by highlighting this documentary project called The Great Reversal at the end.
Yes, the documentary concept.
Right. It argues that for decades, the narrative has deliberately reversed cause and effect, recasting defense as provocation and aggression as resistance, referencing 1948, 1967, Oslo, and 07.
The concept of the Great Reversal introduced at the very end is a profound analytical framework that is currently underutilized in the main body of the text.
It really is buried.
It is. Right now, this highly compelling theoretical framework is relegated to a promotional tag at the very end of the document.
Yeah, if you bury your strongest analytical lens at the very end of the piece, it's like handing someone 3D glasses after the movie is over.
I love that. That is exactly what it feels like.
Because they're disconnected from the main body, the preceding critiques of Vance, Emmanuel, Kana, and Burnham lack a unifying theoretical thesis, right?
Exact. It makes them read more like a list of grievances rather than a cohesive proof of a larger systemic lie.
So what's the fix?
The suggestion is to introduce the Great Reversal at the very beginning as the central thesis of the entire document. Explicitly use the actions of the politicians mentioned as modern-day case studies that prove this historical reversal is happening in real time.
Oh, that completely elevates the whole piece.
It does. Open the piece by defining the Great Reversal. Then, when discussing J.D. Vance's quote to the New York Times about how you can't just kill your way out of solving a problem,
you explicitly frame that as a real-time execution of the reversal.
Yes. Show how Vance is taking Israel's defense against terrorist aggressors and reframing it as unprovoked, bloodthirsty provocation.
And I assume you do the exact same thing for Ro Khanna's PI stunt in the West Bank.
Exact. Show how a fabricated story of settler violence is engineered to cast the defender as the aggressor.
But I wonder, if we move the documentary thesis to the front, do we risk making the piece sound too promotional from the very first paragraph, like an ad?
Not if you frame it purely as an analytical concept. Introduce the phrase the Great Reversal as an intellectual framework, not as a film.
Ah, okay.
Let the framework do the heavy lifting throughout the article, and then at the very end, you can say, if you want to see this framework explored visually, watch the documentary.
That makes total sense. It becomes a natural extension of the article's logic. Well, let's quickly recap our core takeaways for the author today.
Sounds good.
First, structurally group the political figures by ideology, so populist right versus establishment left, to give the critique a robust, organized framework.
Right.
Second, tone down those emotionally charged adjectives like malice and disgusting, and just rely on the juxtaposition of hard facts to persuade skeptical readers.
Exactly. Let the facts be the outrage.
And finally, elevate that powerful Great Reversal concept from a concluding promo to the foundational thesis introduced in the opening paragraph, using the politicians' quotes as direct evidence of this phenomenon.
That structural shift alone will make this piece incredibly strong.
It really will. We want to warmly thank the listener for submitting such deeply knowledgeable and passionate material. We invite you to implement these high-level structural and tonal shifts and submit the revised work back in for another round of feedback in a future critique.
We can't wait to read the next draft.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening and keep writing.